Hi, welcome back to another episode of Can Silicon Valley Save Healthcare? I am Adam Silverman, your host and Chief Medical Officer at Syllable.ai. Today on the podcast, we have David Black, a general partner at Oak HCFT, which, by the way, is an investor in Syllable. David started his career as a coder and wrote code for oil refinery optimization, the ARPANET, large-scale financial transaction processing, document processing, and more. As a GP at Oak, he has invested in and worked and continues to work with a number of prominent health tech companies, including Devoted Health, VillageMD, Syllable, Notable, Olive, Unite Us, and Veda. David is an avid writer with 5 books and a prolific blog, The Black Liszt, and we'll include the link below. And The Black Liszt focuses a discerning eye on technology, finance, and healthcare topics. He has a no-nonsense analytical writing style that is wry and approachable, whether you have industry expertise in the topic he is covering or not. And we're lucky enough to have him here today. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction and for using that kind word wry about my writing as opposed to dripping with sarcasm.
Well, as I told you the first time we talked, I appreciate your writing style. It's kind of the way that I think and wish that I could write. So
very nice of you.
So let's jump right in. You have had experiences as an investor in healthcare. You've been forthright in your writing about your own personal experiences in healthcare. This podcast is all about exploring sort of the current state of healthcare and what can be done to improve experience. So let me just ask you up front, what's your view of the industry of healthcare? Is it broken? Is it slightly off kilter? Is it doing what it should be doing? What do you think?
Well, that's a perfectly reasonable question, and everybody will have opinions, including mine, including me. But let me step back for a minute and say that it all depends on what you compare it to. Every industry, every company, every group, depending on how you judge it, can be either wonderful and kicking it out of the park or pathetic. So it's all about standards and comparison. Our healthcare industry is amazing and wonderful compared to industries in similar healthcare industries in other places of the world. It's astounding. It's one of the reasons why, more people come here for their healthcare than go to some other countries. On the other hand, there are some people in the U.S. who go to other countries for healthcare because it could be less expensive, a lot less expensive. And of course, lots of people who experience healthcare and compare it to other experiences with institutions that they've had find healthcare lacking severely. And they tend to care a lot about it because, after all, it's their health.
Right.
So there is definitely a reasonable point of view that healthcare could be a heck of a lot better than it is. Whether that constitutes broken or not is all about what you compare it to.
Mm-hmm. How about your own personal experiences? What have you had good ones? Have you had bad ones?
Well, the simple answer to that question is yes. I've had good ones and I've had bad ones. Overall, I'd say I'm pretty pleased overall. But as I have gone through the journey of getting what has been, on the whole, pretty good results, I have encountered quite a number of completely mysteriously inexcusable behavior and systems and structures in both among payers, among providers, among the systems that they use, the whole range. And it's a shame because you would like there to be a lot more consistency than there is, given that the quality, when delivered well, can be among the best quality that you can get anywhere. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's to stop the industry from hitting that quality everywhere. And what is it about the systems in healthcare, including the computer systems and the administration and everything else, that, all right, here I'll get into a real opinion, that when you compare those systems, the computing systems and other things that relate to things that objectively are customers, although in the healthcare industry we tend to call them patients.
Right.
I think we call them patients for two reasons. One, to distract us from the fact that we're really customers and deserve to be treated like customers, number one. And number two, to do anything with healthcare requires a great deal of patience on the part of the customer. So, from the point of view of the patients, the customers, the systems like scheduling something, getting something to happen at the right time and at the right place can be excruciating. And when you compare those experiences to the similar customer, non-patient, but customer experiences in other industries, the healthcare IT stuff is truly at the bottom of the heap. And it's a very messy heap, I have to say, and it's at the bottom of it. It's rotting, and it doesn't appear to be getting any better.
You talk a lot about systems and healthcare IT. If we look at the investment landscape in health tech, there's just been this huge influx of money by investors investing in entrepreneurs who come from a tech background or come from so-called Silicon Valley that have phenomenal ideas and prolific ideas about how to make the consumer experience better, how to undo some of the technical obstacles that you sort of hinted at. So, is this a viable approach? Can this Silicon Valley entrepreneur / investor industrial complex help with these issues that you've identified in terms of making healthcare more consumer oriented and improving the tech stack, so to speak?
Well, there's a couple of issues there. Obviously, there has been lots of investment. Obviously, some people have made a bunch of money. But like anything else, there are issues. Number one issue I would say is, let's say, why does California, Silicon Valley, have a reputation for riches? Well, it's had a reputation that way for a while. Remember the gold rush? People rushed out there to mine a bunch of gold. So imagine that a bunch of people who were enriched by mining gold out in California said, well, I'm rich. I can do this anywhere. Why don't I go back to that crappy old place called New York City and mine for gold there because I'm a really good gold miner. And I can look at all this gold I've gotten. I'm good at it. If the rich gold miners had come back to New York just to demonstrate their gold mining money-making capabilities to those primitive city people in New York, and that's exactly what happens when the Silicon Valley rich people who have made so much wealth out in Silicon Valley come to Healthcare City. And they start doing what they did in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And they find that they're not allowed to dig in the middle of Broadway. Oh, they find that there are these things called pre-authorizations. And you can't do stuff without pre-authorizations. And no, this isn't possible. And no, that's not legal. And oh, you've got to have the right status and qualifications to do this, that, or the other thing. And before long, the Silicon Valley investor, has spent a lot of money, made a lot of noise, and gotten exactly nowhere. Mm-hmm. And that has been the pattern. So healthcare may seem like it's this primitive place where it's all you need to do is, it's a horse and buggy kind of place. And all you need to do is come in there with your steam railroads and everybody will embrace you and love you because you've improved transportation so much. And yet what you don't realize is that everything's set up for horses. and they depend on horses. And if you come in there and suddenly, toss all the hay out of the barn so that you can start putting coal in there. They're not going to hail you as a hero for your steam. They're going to come after you for killing their damn horses. And that's just the way it is.
Right.
So there is a huge infrastructure. It's been up for a long time. It's like a very substantial and growing part of the US economy. It has its own set of rules. And when a bunch of outsiders come in with their chips on their shoulder and their gold in their pockets, and they say, oh, you poor little fools, I'm going to fix things and bring you into the 21st century here. Some people will embrace that. Some dissatisfied people in healthcare will embrace them and say, oh, you're right, there's a lot of stuff that needs fixing. Please come in and fix us. And they'll come in, and after a while, without declaring defeat, without saying, oh, this is too hard a problem for me, or any of those things that, rational, non-arrogant people will say when they've been horribly defeated, suddenly it just kind of, not suddenly, but gradually the thing just fades away into nothingness. That's the typical pattern.
Yet you are a participant in this investment process. How do you look at what you do vis-a-vis the investments you make and the companies that you invest in that's different than what the West Coast Gold Rush folks are looking for? Are you, because you live on the East Coast, are you more aware of the status quo and working within the status quo to generate change? You have very strong opinions about this process, and yet you participate in the process too, I guess is my question.
I do. I participate in it because healthcare is obviously important. We all like to be healthy. When we are not healthy, we like to have help in becoming healthy, and that's what healthcare is all about. So it's an incredibly important subject. It's achieved amazing advances in spite of all the just criticisms that can be directed at it. And everyone involved wants it to be better. So, and it can be made better. We see that things get better all the time in various ways in healthcare. We just like them to get better more quickly. And so the trick is, regardless of where you live, and this is a location independent thing, is to know enough about how the system really works on the inside. You can't just go out, blast in there as an outsider and say, hey, healthcare, welcome me with open arms. I'm going to change everything you do right away. It'll be better. Trust me. That doesn't work. But then that doesn't work anywhere, after all. It's just that healthcare is a little bit larger and more entrenched and a little bit more technologically weird than some of the other places that could use some help. So you got to know what's going on, first of all. Second of all, you got to know what can be changed. Some things just aren't going to be changed, even if they badly need changing. So you've got to find a subject, partners, a strategy where you will be welcomed as opposed to resisted with every. You've got to find an opening where it really will make a difference. Once it's proven, it can spread, and that it doesn't threaten entrenched things that simply are unwilling or unable to change. But then after all, that's the formula for all innovation in all fields. So it's really no different in healthcare. It's just that the weirdness in healthcare tends to be a little bit, strange for most people.
So as you as an investor and as Oak as an investment company evaluate potential entrepreneurs and companies, are there specifics that you can talk about some of the companies that you've invested in that, either the leadership, the idea, the scalability, the technology, that just, that made sense for an investment, where you thought that this particular company or this particular entrepreneur really had an opportunity to work with, not in spite of, the pre-existing conditions of healthcare to be successful?
Yeah, well, we've made a bunch of what are looking like and what have proven so far to be great investments. And let me just say that we could only have made those investments because of having serious long-term not just investment, but interaction and involvement in the healthcare industry. Our team has been part of it for more than 20 years, the predecessor to the current fund, the people.
Yep.
And that experience in part is what leads to knowledge of what's going on, knowledge of what the opportunities are, and connection. We frequently, we're not just responding to letters that come in the mail from people we've never heard of. We've got connections. We've got people know us. We know who the people are. And so that network is an incredibly important and a great source of introduction. They're not really introductions.
Right.
We're working with people that we know. And frequently the investments that we make are introduced to us by people that we know in our network. So a good example of that is we were early investors in a company called Athena Health,
Right.
which is currently, one of the major providers of IT. It has over 10% of the market. It's a dominating share in the small practices. It went public a long time ago. I was involved with them along with the leader of our fund, Annie Lamont, from the beginning.
You did the initial due diligence, didn't you?
I did. And it was interesting there because Silicon Valley was looking at it. And this is during the internet boom. And Annie said to me, well, this company looks really promising. But the word out is that they're using non-scalable toy technology. And it's being built by this kid who just isn't serious about modern internet scalability. Well, the kid turned out to be one of the founders, Todd Park's baby brother, Ed Park, merely a recent graduate of computer science from Harvard, who was a great programmer, who, Todd and Jonathan Bush, the founders of the company, had founded this thing. They found that the software was unavailable, it was crap. And so, gee, Eddie, can you help us out with the software? So Ed came along. He was already skilled in programming Perl and a couple of other things in the emerging, internet at that time. So he thought about it a little bit. He found out what the problems were. He just had at it, started coding away. And Perl, the specific language that he used, is called a scripting language, widely used at the time, still used, but not as widely, for programming browsers and the internet and that sort of thing. Serious programmers at the time in Silicon Valley required the use of Java, which is the serious programmer's object-oriented language. And anybody with a computer science degree would naturally use a serious, language as opposed to some toy.
Right.
So I talked to the kid brother, and very quickly it turned out that, he was using Perl, but more importantly, he was using it in a way that would allow not only the screens to be built, but where everybody else is using Java to effectively build industrial strength, concrete poured with rebars, solid frames and doors and windows and all that. Ed was building things where if you wanted a new window, you wanted a new door, whatever, click, 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 hit the button and boom, it appears there, just like with an architecture program. Well, gee, that's what software is. That's what it's supposed to be. You don't use rebar and concrete to make it permanent and all of that. And Ed had this marvelous architectural approach that allowed them to very quickly adapt to evolving needs, not only of their own practice, but of other practices. What an idea. Software that's easy to modify to your use. So anyway, Ed was brilliant. He knew what the heck he was doing. Perl was just a detail. I said, this kid is brilliant. Let's invest in the company. And one thing led to another, and they worked out really well. And by the way, Todd went on to great things, became the chief technology officer of the United States in the Obama administration. And later, I continued to work with Ed over the years at Athena Health. And later, when they left, and he and Todd decided to form Devoted Health, which is a new approach to Medicare Advantage,
Right.
which used software, guess what, to really help manage patients across providers and keep them make sense and use it, make everything modern, et cetera, and using modern workflow tools. And Ed, how many CEOs of healthcare companies can program software? And how many technology people anywhere who started out programming software continue to be able to program software even when they're the CEOs of companies? Well, that's Ed. And Ed he is so far ahead of the vast majority of the most advanced software people in all of the big companies and everything in the world that isn't even funny. And so he's built the structure for Devoted Health. He and his brother correctly discerned that by using this software approach, they could make a Medicare Advantage system that patients would love, that they would like it better than everything else, because it wasn't just like another insurance company. It was a company that actually helped them achieve better health, and where the software could be rapidly adapted to the needs of the customer. And Ed led this from the beginning, and sure enough, Devoted has been a rocket ship. People really love it, and it's because they picked an opening. They had the experience and the knowledge of the internals. They avoided all of the nightmare of the existing software. They built their own software from scratch.
Interesting.
And that is so hard to do. But Ed has the horsepower to actually pull it off, which is a rare thing.
So let's transition from sort of the external players who might have some impact on healthcare. You've got some opinions about how healthcare can help healthcare. You sort of look at you have a framework that you view innovation through, and you sort of have analyzed healthcare and how healthcare does innovation, and you actually have coined a term in oldvation. So can you talk a little bit about that, and perhaps what are the pearls in there if you were sitting in front of a health system CEO who was struggling with this whole concept of innovation?
Right. Well, this took a long time for me to figure out. And then when I began looking over, lots of things that were real innovations in the real world and people thought of them that way, I realized that an awful lot of them weren't new in any objective sense at all. I realized that most frequent thing was somebody on one island of technology getting newsletters from other islands where they were using this cool thing. And everybody was using it on this other island. And the guy on this island reads the newsletters and say, hey, that's a cool idea. I'm going to use it. I'm going to be the first one to do it in this island. I'm going to be an innovator. And yeah, he's an innovator on that island.
Right.
But he is doing the safest and most successful pattern of innovation, which is do not innovate. Copy what works. Hope maybe if you have to give it a new name, but change as little as you can get away with.
Right.
To take the thing that works over there and make it work here. And one of the things that innovators frequently fail at, and entrepreneurs frequently fail at, is that they think of themselves as inventors, as entrepreneurs. And so they try to invent lots of stuff. They may grab something that works in some other island, but no, grabbing something that works isn't good enough for them. They've got to invent lots of new stuff along the way. And it's the new stuff that they've invented all along the way that causes the objectively, working thing that worked over there to fail to work here. So you've got to be pretty smart when you're copying a proven idea.
Right.
You've got to copy it. You've got to make a few modifications to make it work on your island. You got to pick the right place on the island where it's going to be accepted and where it will make a difference and people will recognize it. Being too soon is a problem. You can't, you can't impose this new thing when people aren't ready for it yet. And so that's a clear thing. So I came up with this. The key example for me was when I noticed technologies that I had first encountered 40 years ago or more. And I saw, like the case of resource optimization, that in oil refineries, which is where I was working on it as a kid before I went to college, where this oil company was using it to run their refinery. And as it turns out, the SO, now Exxon refiner in Venezuela, just by coincidence. And I knew that there were lots of experienced engineers who had been employed by SO who resisted like crazy having one of these newfangled computer things tell them how to run their damn refinery. Get out of here. Well, the managers were greedy enough to make money that they made some trials, and sure enough, the linear programming optimization did a better job than the engineers with their calculators and their 3x5 cards and all that did for the refinery. So it became standard practice, and it worked. Nobody in that industry more than 50 years ago would have thought it would be malpractice.
Right.
And even if you insisted on malpractice, your profits would start going down compared to the other oil companies. So you had to do it just to keep up. And that, by the way, is how these innovations spread. It's not because people love innovations. It's because everybody else is doing it. And so I damn well better catch up.
Right.
And so, but it only works within islands. And so, the fact that the oil industry is doing it is this little island that is so far from healthcare, it isn't even funny. So eventually the process optimization algorithm moved from the island of oil refineries to other sort of similar things, and eventually moved to retail in the 80s. And it became a dominating thing in the 80s. And finally, leaving out lots of details, wanting to get into history here, some radical person applied it in healthcare to an infusion center. And infusion centers are relatively new things. They don't threaten the power of doctors, MDs, who control things.
Right.
They consider themselves as being this important thing, but it's off to the side. It's run by sort of administrators and people who they're employed by. And so somebody comes along who has an inn, who's talking with a struggling infusion center that's losing business to the other infusion centers. And they say, oh, hey, I've got this idea that can make your infusion center a lot more efficient. Turn it from a money loser to a money maker. What do you say? And so the key to innovation is always find somebody who's desperate. So they found somebody who's desperate. They took this proven technology, applied it to scheduling the infusion center, and boom, within weeks, they had 30% more throughput in the same infusion center with the same, no capital change, no labor change, no nothing else. It's just getting the people in there in a more effective way. So then they spread the same thing to operating rooms. And anyway, we did not invest in this company. It's doing very well. But that's an example of an in-old-vation, which is to say it's an old technique,
right.
Resource optimization, proven literally 50 times before. It went island hopping, this technique, from oil to retail to other things, and finally that most distant technology item of healthcare. And even then, there was nothing technological that prevented it from being employed there decades before it was. It just required the right people who had the right idea, who could see that, who had the right experience in linear programming optimization, who happened to be involved in healthcare, who happened to know some people who were open to the idea and who were desperate. And it's one thing led to another, and boom, there it is. It could have happened 20 years before it did. Or it might have been delayed for another couple of decades. You don't know. That's the part. So you can almost always predict what's going to happen. You can't predict who or when
right.
it's going to happen. Those things are like beyond me.